All right, again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Should Co-op Business Owners Prepare for Succession and Exit Planning? My name is Brian Munson, Business Development and Sales Manager at NCBA CLUSA, and I will be today's webinar moderator. Again, your webinar today is co-hosted by NCBA CLUSA and Castle Wealth Advisors. Before we get into that webinar, though, just a quick bit of housekeeping for everyone. Participant phone lines will be muted through this presentation to reduce background noise. There will be a chance, however, to pose a question, just not verbally. If you do have a question, please type it into the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. That's usually on the right side of your screen. Questions will be collected and answered at the end of the program as time allows. We should have about 15 or so minutes to do that. NCBA CLUSA is recording this webinar and it will be archived on our website. You will receive an email containing that link to the posted recording within the next few days, so just be sure that you're checking your inbox and feel free to share that with any of your colleagues, peers, staff, whomever would be interested in this particular topic. So again, your panelist today is Gary Pittsford, CEO of Castle Wealth Advisors. Gary has over 3 decades of comprehensive fee-only financial advisory experience and has held numerous leadership positions both locally and nationally. Gary has also spoken at many national conventions, including NCBA CLUSA's. He's contributed to and written articles for industry-specific and national publications, and many accolades are well-deserved. He actually just published a book called Your Family Business, Your Family Net Worth that brings together all of his best practices in a compelling and very informative read, so I encourage you all to check that out. Just for a bit about Castle Wealth Advisors, again, they are a fee-only advisory firm that designs and implements financial strategies for closely held business owners to achieve their goals and protect their business and family assets. Gary and his team are proven experts at developing succession and transition plans for family business owners, which also includes retirement income strategies, along with reviewing and designing estate documents to minimize estate taxes and protect closely held family business assets. They have experience executing valuations for family business owners for reasons like gifting stock to family members, selling the company, divorce, probate, etc. And they also have experience developing long-term strategies to help protect and manage wealth over several generations. So Gary is and Castle Wealth are associate members of NCBA CLUSA. They've worked with us for a very long time. We trust them, and we hope that you find this information valuable. So with that said, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Gary, and we can get started. Gary?
Thank you, Brian. I was wondering if you were ever going to let me have the floor here. We got to cut that intro shorter.
You got it.
Hi, everyone.
We'll stop doing so much, and we'll be able to cut it short.
Thank you.
You got
it. It's fun to go through this with a lot of new people who have not heard this before. I know there's some old friends listening. I appreciate everybody from Purina and Sphere One and CCA Global and ACE and everybody in the hardware industry for dialing in. It's nice to have a few old friends listening. If I make a mistake, I expect one of them to be sure and let me know. What Brian and CCA wanted me to do this afternoon was for a lot of the different co-op members that I don't talk to each year, is to go through the standard succession planning, business planning ideas. There are actually millions of closely held business owners in the country, somewhere between 5 and 7 million, that would like to retire in the next 3 to 4 years. There's a lot of baby boomers. There's a lot of people out there between 60 and 70 that would like to retire, and they don't know how to do it. You know, and so what we'll try and do in the next 45 minutes is to cover about 5 important categories that every business owner, and I don't care if they're in the hardware business or the lumber business or the cattle food business or any other business, what business owners need to be thinking about in order to get ready for that retirement time, for selling it, whether they sell it within the family or outside the family. No matter what they do, we'll try and touch upon ideas. I love questions, so if anybody has a question, be sure and send it to Brian so that we can talk about them. Brian, let me try and speed through some of this and let the audience watch the slides. The next slide that you've got there just shows a lot of the different co-ops and a lot of the different companies that we've worked with over the years. The co-op method of doing business is excellent, and there's a lot of great companies in the co-op world, and some of them are on there and some of them I haven't talked to yet, but over the next 4 or 5 years I'll try and make that picture even bigger. Brian, what's next? Oh, okay. I put this slide on because I want you all to know that you're part of a big club. There's about 28 million closely held family businesses in the United States. And out of that 28 million, about 20 million have 1 to 4 employees, about 7 million have about 20 employees, and about 500,000 have between 20 and 500 employees. The SBA and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and a lot of other organizations, they kind of draw the line at 500 people. So if you have less than 500 employees in a family-held business, you're considered a small company. If you have over 500 employees, you come into a different category. Closely held family businesses are so important. They're the engine that really runs the company. So if the country is doing well, that's because all these 28 million people are doing better. 54% of the private workforce works for these family businesses. About 50% of all the domestic product that we produce is done by family businesses. And another important item, which is real important, is that if 10 people get hired next week, probably 6 or 7 were hired by closely held family businesses. So Walmart and General Electric and Apple don't hire most of the people. It's these small independent grocery stores and hardware stores and roofing companies and heating and air conditioning companies that hire most of the people. Brian, what's next? These are some of the problems that we were going to try and address when we talk to people, and what I'll try and address here. As I said, there's 5 or 6 million at least baby boomers that are age 60 or over, and about 60% of them would like to retire in between 1 year and 5 years. The second item there talks about family businesses and the family itself, and these are the two areas that everything boils down to, either business or family. I spend a huge amount of time talking about family, the children that's in the company, the children that's not in the company, and talking about the business and how to make the business last for another generation. Another generation is usually about 25 to 30 years. That's what they consider a generation. So which children are in the company and which children are not? What's the best way to transition the company? How do I minimize taxes? What is the business worth? So there's a lot of business questions and a lot of family questions, and that's where I spend a lot of time. And then just so that you know that a lot of people, only about 30%, make it to the second generation, because the other 70% didn't plan or something went wrong. There's all kinds of reasons why the 70% don't make it. And only about 1 or 2% make it to the fourth generation. You know, so when I'm at different conventions, it's always fun to have people hold up their hands if they've been in the fourth or the fifth or the sixth generation, because there's not very many of those. Brian, can you go to the next one? These are the 6 important ovals that every business owner needs an answer to. If the business owner has an answer for every one of these ovals and he's got each one of them figured out, then he's ready to sell the company. We're going to touch upon these. I won't dwell on them right now, but as you can see, we're talking about business, the family, taxes, retirement decisions, and all kinds of legal documents that you have to protect yourself. So let's go to the next one. Okay, the first thing that we need to know is what kind of company you have. I usually tell most retail and wholesale type companies that being an S-Corp is probably your best choice. Some people are limited liability companies, and some have family partnerships. The most difficult one that we work with is the C-Corp. And a lot of the older companies, I was talking to somebody yesterday that had been in business for over 80 years, and they were a C Corp. And if you go back beyond 1955 and older, the only thing that was available was a C Corp. And so President Eisenhower created the S Corp in the 50s, and then the limited liability companies were created in the 70s. But as you can see, most attorneys and accountants agree with me that in the last 30 years, the S Corps and the LLCs have gone from 10 million to 26 million, and the C Corps have gone down instead of up, from about 2.2 down to 1.6. So with the tax laws that we have on the books right now I don't know if they're going to change the tax laws next year or not, but with the tax laws that we have right now, there's no good reason for someone to be a C Corp if you're going to be a privately held family business. So I need to know what kind of business. Every one of these is a little different. The S Corp is a little different than the limited liability company, and the C Corp is different than all the others. So depending upon which trail we go down, I need to know what kind of company you have. Next, Brian. Okay, what's my stock worth? Let's talk about what's the business worth, how do I value the business? And I always tell people there's two different companies on this page, Company A and Company B. And I'm going to call Company A Adam and Company B Bob. Both of them have worked 30 years. Both of them have sales of about 2 million. One's got inventory of 700,000, the other one's 500. One's got stockholders' equity, which is very important. What's your stockholders' equity? That's what the banker wants to know. What's your stockholders' equity? One's 450 and one's 300. But when you look at those two companies and they're ready to sell, they want to quit a week from now or 6 months from now. Which one is more valuable, Adam's company or Bob's company? The answer is B. The company with 42% gross margin, higher owner salaries, and higher profits is worth more than Company A, which has higher inventory. So inventory is important, assets are important, stockholders' equity is important, but profitability and cash flow is more important. So as we go through this, what does Adam have to do to try and get his company up to the same level as Bob, so that the two of them can sell for about the same price? You know, what is Adam done wrong in Company A? So, Brian, what's next? Next is the 5 steps I was going to talk about. For Company A, or Adam, to make his company better, what does Adam have to do the next 3 or 4 years to make his company more valuable, to get it ready to sell? Now, some people might say, if I'm selling to my kids, I don't want it to be more valuable, but the answer to that is that the kids need more cash flow in order to pay off mom and dad. So cash flow is important. If you're selling to your key employees, your senior manager wants to buy you out, he needs all the cash flow that he can come up with in order to make payments to you to buy the company. If you're selling to somebody in your industry, they want all the cash flow that they can have in order to pay off the note that they have to go to the bank and borrow for you, and then also have enough money left for themselves. So cash flow is real important. So step number 1 is to work on your gross margins. What I've tried to tell people over the years is that if your gross margin, and I realize that if you're in the grocery industry or the hardware industry or the cattle food, hog food industry, margins are different. You know, if you're in the lumber industry, it's different. You know, but if your margin is, let's say hardware, if your margin is 36%, can you increase that gross margin by 1% a year for the next 3 years? Can you get it from 36% to 39 or 40% 3 years from now? You know, if you're in the ag business and your margins should be 20%, but they're only 15%, can you get that margin up 1% a year for the next 3 years? If you can do that, you're going to add enormous value to your business. So that's the first thing to work on, is start working on gross margins. Brian, go to step 2. Step 2 is the other side of the coin, is to lower your costs. A lot of people, I look at hundreds of tax returns and financial statements every year. And the two biggest expenses that most people have is rent, and if you're paying yourself rent, that's okay, I don't care, and payroll. So a lot of times if you've got people that have been with you for 20, 30 years, they keep getting pay raises, and your payroll gets too high. Your benefits get too high. With the healthcare industry that we have now, a lot of people are readjusting their healthcare benefits. But your payroll needs to be in line with your national averages. So whatever your SIC code is, we need to be looking at what the national average is. So if your payroll should be 20% and you're actually at 24%, you need to get that down closer to 20%. So the first item there is lower interest rates. If you can go to the bank, we've got real low interest rates right now, and if you can lower your interest rates, do so. Renegotiate the loans and get a lower interest rate. If you have stockholders loans, try to get those paid off. If you have a loan to the company, or if the company has loaned the owner money, we try to clean off unwanted information on the financial statements. If you're going to be selling to someone in your industry, what you want to deliver to them is a financial statement that's real clean without a lot of extra stuff on there like loans to stockholders or loans from stockholders, because all of those kinds of things just make the buyer ask more questions. So if you've got stuff on there that was paid off 4 or 5 years ago, have the accountant take it off the statement. Now, every week I work with somebody who's got something on his financial statement that was paid off years ago, and they just never took it off. So clean up the financial statements, reduce your costs if you can at 2% a year for the next 3 years. Just find something, whether it's payroll or rent or something in your financial statement where you can reduce it 2% a year. If you can do that, at the same time you're increasing margins by 1% a year, you're adding enormous value to the business and cash flow that you're going to need later. And then the other thing is to make sure that over the next 3 years or so that you have the right people in the right job with the right salary. Make sure your people are well trained. If you're selling outside the family, if I was going to buy your business, we would talk about price first. And if we kind of agree on price, then the next thing, excuse me, the next thing I want to know is I want to know all about your people. How well trained are they? How long have they been in their positions? So you want to know, I need to know everything about your people, and I need to know which ones are good and how good are your managers. So work on the cash flow, reduce expenses, and get the right people in the right job and get the right training. If you've got well-trained people, it makes your company more valuable. What's next? Brian, can you go to step 3? Add backs. When I'm at conventions, I always talk to people about what their add backs are. And in the financial advisory world and the valuation world, add backs are the things where the company is paying for your cell phone. The company's paying for your health insurance. The company's paying for the country club dues. The company owns the car and pays for the repairs. The company paid your grandchildren to sweep the floors all summer. If you took stuff out the back door and took it home to fix up your home, all the stuff that you take out under the owner's account number, we need to know what all that adds up to. Because if you take out $10,000 a year in benefits, that's going to add, if I can add that back, those are all add backs. If I can add that back to my valuation report, that's probably going to add between $30,000 and $40,000 of value to the company. So every $10,000, every $1,000, it adds up. So the owner's expenses we talked about, excess payroll. If the payroll's too high, try and get the payroll down. We can add back interest off the tax return. We can add back depreciation off the tax return, and one-time expenses. Like if you remodeled the lighting in your showroom, and that was a one-time expense, and if it wasn't fully depreciated, then we can add that back, because if it was fully depreciated, then it'll be in the depreciation number right above it. But we have to look at all those items to figure out what's the real cash flow that you've got to work with. Okay, Brian, what's step 4? Oh, they sucked this in. This is an example of cash flow and all the add backs. I just wanted you to see how it all adds up. This company had $100,000 of profit on their tax return, and the owner's salary was a little higher than national averages, so we added back some of the owner's salary to bring it down to a national average. When you sell a company, you can't add back all the salary, but you can add back part of it. And then we added back the depreciation and the interest off of the tax return, the country club dues, excess rent. And if you're paying yourself rent, I don't care how much you pay in rent, but when it's time to sell the company, if they're going to rent the building from you, they're going to pay rent for whatever is normal rent in your town. So if the rent should be 5% of sales and you're actually paying 7% of sales, then we would add back some of the rent, and that's what we did here. The one-time expenses, if the owner's going to walk away, then the company's been paying $1,000 a month for his health insurance, so we added back the health insurance, and we added back the safe harbor $2,000 matching his 401k plan. So his EBITDA, his usable cash flow, is $255,000. So that's the magic number that he's got to work with. So if his kids are going to buy him out, we have to come up with a plan after we pay the seller, pay the kids, and pay taxes. It has to add up to $255,000 or less. So if you come up with a plan where the price is too high and the payments add up to $300,000, then that plan is not going to work. So for this guy here, his magic number is $255. For everybody listening, your number is going to be a little different. Every family is different, and that's why all these add backs, we need to know what they are so that we can add them all back to come up with the right number. Okay, Brian, what's next? Step 4, clean up the financials, what I talked about a little bit ago. If I was going to buy your business, or if anybody's going to buy your business, I'm only going to buy the good inventory. So if you've got $600,000 of inventory and 100,000 of it is old because it's been laying around for 2 or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, you need to have a tent sale and get rid of it, because the buyer's not going to buy the old inventory. So sell it at 50, 60% off. When you deliver a financial statement to a buyer, if it's outside the family, you want that financial statement to be accurate. You want to be able to say that the inventory is the real inventory. The accounts receivable is the real accounts receivable. So if a builder filed bankruptcy and you're going to lose $10,000, you need to subtract that from your accounts receivable. Loans from stockholders, if you can pay those off, get rid of them. Because if I'm looking at a financial statement and I see that the stockholder made a loan to the company, I'm going to ask, and the buyer's going to ask, well, why did you have to loan money to the company? So you need to have a real good answer for that. But if you can, get rid of it so that the question doesn't even come up. And remove all the old entries like I talked about a minute ago. Anything that doesn't belong on that financial statement, get rid of it so that it's nice and clean and accurate. This is getting the company ready for sale. All these things that I've talked about in the first 4 steps, all should be done over that 2 to 3 to 4 year period before you actually sell the company. So these are the things that owners should be working on. Brian, go to step 5. This is an important item. You only get to, hopefully you only get to sell the company 1 time. You don't want to sell it 2 or 3 times. And you need to have the best team that you can to help you put this together. And And I realize that high-paid attorneys, corporate attorneys, real estate tax attorneys are not cheap. Accountants are not cheap. You know, financial advisors are not cheap. But you need to have people doing this to put together a blueprint or a plan for you that do it every month, every week. Because you don't want somebody who's only done it 2 or 3 times in the last 5 years. That's the wrong advisor. So build your team. Find attorneys that do this all the time. And if they're not in your hometown, go to a bigger town and find a law firm, an accounting firm that does this all the time. Work with a banker, because if you're going to be selling, the buyer may want an SBA loan. So we need a bank that is works a lot with the SBA. The SBA has approved bankers, approved banks that can expedite all the paperwork. And then your co-op that you work with. A lot of the co-ops that I work with all over the country have people designated on their staff to help their members with selling within the co-op. What should be done, especially if the co-op has patronage stock, preferred stock in the co-op. When does that trigger the sale of that preferred stock? So most co-ops have somebody in their headquarters that can help them, and we work with those people all the time. So get with your co-op and start with those people. Maybe the retail consultant or the district manager that comes by your place every month or so, start talking with them. With your team, you want to start talking about those things down below. Force them, meet with them about 2 hours every 6 months during that last 3-year period. Every 6 months, talk about fine-tuning the selling methods. There's 3 or 4 or 5 different ways to sell a company. Which method is best for me? Which is going to give me the least amount of tax? So make them start giving you ideas. Make them start thinking about what they should be doing 36 months from now, getting you ready. Reduce taxes is next. Develop a term sheet. A term sheet, or some lawyers call it a letter of intent. And in that term sheet, you want to list, here's what I'm selling, and then here's what I'm keeping. Like, I'm going to keep most of my cash. I'm going to keep my preferred stock in my co-op. I'm going to keep my pickup truck. I'm going to keep my office desk. Here's what I'm going to keep, and here's what I'm going to sell. I'm going to sell the inventory, accounts receivable, furniture and fixtures, the forklift, and whatever else is out there. So in that term sheet, you want to start listing what you're keeping and what you're selling, and start developing the terms. And the attorney on your team can start putting that together for you. You need to see what it looks like a year or so ahead of time. Force your accountants to estimate the taxes. So I would say to the accountants, if they were sitting here right now, I would say, I'm going to sell my business 3 years from now for $1 million. Okay, I want you to tell me next week what my taxes are going to be. So force them to calculate the tax, and there's corporate taxes, there's recapture, there's personal taxes, there's capital gains. What is the basis that you have in the company? I'm going to sell it for $1 million, and over the last 30 years, I've put money into it, and it adds up, and my basis is $200,000. So the first $200,000 I get back free, and then I got to pay tax on the $800,000. So you need to know, what is my basis? What is my taxes? So force the accountants to start working on that 3 years ahead of time. Make them give you different estimates. You want to figure out what's the net proceeds. So if I sell it for $1 million and I pay $200,000 in taxes, I get $800,000. If I invest the $800,000, what's my future income going to be? My 401k plan, my real estate properties, all the assets that I've got that produce income, what is my income going to be? Most owners need to know what that is before they sell. That's one of the things that bothers a lot of owners, is that right now I can control my salary and my bonuses and my benefits, but when I sell the company, I can't control anything. So I want to know that I've got good retirement income before I actually sign the papers and sell this company. So force them to start estimating future income. The financial person that you choose to work with, hopefully they're fee only. Fee only means they don't get any commissions. Hopefully they're an RIA, which means Registered Investment Advisor. If they're registered with the SEC, then they have to be a fiduciary and do what's best for you. And if they're fee only, they're not selling products, that's even better. Those are the kind of people, because when you sell that company for money, I would rather you not spend a lot on commissions. I want it invested for your future benefit, not for some brokerage firm or insurance agency. So pick the right team, get the right attorneys, accountants, and financial people, and start developing that blueprint 3 years in advance, and force them to get together a couple of hours every 6 months and keep talking about ideas. I've spent too much time on that, Brian. What's next? Now we're down to the last of the ovals, which is all the legal documents. What you want to protect the company is a bunch of legal documents, and I usually suggest in all 50 states, if you're in a community property state, the documents look a little different, but in all 50 states, most business owners should have a will and a revocable living trust. And if I'm going to give stock to my son or daughter, I would want them to have a will and a trust also. And if I'm going to have 2 or 3 stockholders in the company, we need that stock redemption agreement. And I'll talk about more about that in a minute. The stock redemption agreement is the most important document. When a business owner dies and the attorney or the widow calls me, the first thing I need to know is there a stock redemption agreement? And I need to read it right away. That's the first thing. That's more important than the wills and trusts. The other thing that's needed, especially for older people or anybody that's got health problems, whether it be Alzheimer's or cancer or heart attacks or whatever, are durable powers. You know, so a durable power for health care, which means somebody can talk to the doctors and the hospitals and provide health care decisions, and a general durable power for financial care. So if I'm laid up, somebody in my family can sign my checkbook and pay my bills. Those are very important documents. The business letter is important. When I go to conventions, I sometimes ask people, if somebody dies in the first week or two, what's my biggest problem? And I always tell them my biggest problem for the first few days is passwords. If the business owner dies, we need to know what are the passwords to get into the software, to get into the bank accounts, to transfer money to cover payroll. Who's going to be running the business while the owner is laid up in the hospital? There's a lot of things that need to go into that business letter, and you need to put it in a safe somewhere where somebody can find it. And then I talk about a personal letter, which a personal letter is where you would tell your children, well, we want one child to have 51% because we think he can run the company. The other kids that work there would split up the 49%. Or you could say we want all 3 kids to have a third each. But you need to talk about your thought process on who gets the company and who gets the other assets, and kind of talk about that, because families appreciate that understanding, that what thoughts went into how they divided up the assets among the children. So the personal letter is helpful. Brian, let's go to the next one. We're running out of time. I don't want to dwell too long. Remember, I told you the stock redemption agreement is very important. And the one thing that you need to look at, an important stock price on the top line is important, but the trigger points are the main thing. If you have a stock redemption agreement prepared several years ago, take a look at it, pull it out. There should be a paragraph in there, a separate paragraph for each one of these trigger points. So if I've given stock to my son or my daughter, or my brother and I own a company, or my brother and my sister and I own a company, if there's several people involved, we need a stock redemption agreement that protects everybody in the business in case of a death, a disability, a divorce, personal bankruptcy, termination, retirement, or a stock sale. So there needs to be a separate paragraph for each one of these. Most people, 99% of the people where I read a stock redemption agreement, the only thing it covers is death. and usually there's a life insurance policy involved. I'm less concerned about death. The two that I have to deal with most of the time is disability and divorce. There's a lot of Alzheimer's, there's a lot of cancer, and there's a lot of divorces. So that document has to explain what happens to the stock in case of Alzheimer's or what happens in case of divorce. So read your document. If it doesn't have everything in there, all those different items, then it needs to be brought up to date by an attorney or pick a different attorney. Brian, go to the next one, please. Now we're going to wrap it all up. That was a brief view of a family with 3 generations, and then this next slide just simply says that this is what Castle does. All of our people working here work with the business owners on all those 6 different ovals up there, and then we work with the business transition ideas and the retirement ideas and wills and trusts and wealth management and protecting the net worth. So that's what Castle does. And if you have questions, shoot them off. But Brian, what's next? Oh, I showed you this because if you go to our website, which is Castle 3, and you'll see it in just a minute, on our website, the 3rd gold bar down talks about business concepts. And if you click on that, there's dozens and dozens of articles that we've written about wills and trusts and selling inside the family and selling outside the family and succession planning and all the things we've talked about. And you can print off the articles and read through them. There's even at the very bottom down there, there's an ugly guy that talks about, for about 4 minutes, each of those videos is about 4 minutes long, and they just talk about selling inside the family or outside the family. So some people don't like to read, but they would watch a 4-minute video, so they can watch those. Go to the next one, Brian. Thank you, sir. Oh, Brian mentioned the new book that came out a few months ago. In this book, I talk about everything that I've covered in the last hour or so, but it's important to talk about how the family business should be structured for a transition. And then after I sell the business, then how do you protect your net worth? Because most business owners know how to run their business, but all of this other stuff about investment allocations and inflation and wills and trusts and should it be in joint name or should it be in my wife's name and all that items that come up with protecting the net worth, most people don't understand. So I try to put a lot of stuff in that book about protecting your net worth. Amazon has it. What do they also have, Amy? They have a Kindle version. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Kindle version. So anyway, it's available. Brian, what's next? Oh, we're done. If you go to castle3.com, which you'll see on there, you can print off articles if you want to read them, or you can send me an email, which is Gary@Castle3, and I'll be glad to answer anybody's questions or emails. We're always available to help anybody in the co-op world on how to protect themselves and how to protect the co-op and to protect all the members in the co-op. So we're glad to help everybody. Brian, I think that's it. Did you have any questions, or did everybody already sign off by now?
No. We do have a few questions, and Gary, thank you for all that information. I think that's really like a wealth of knowledge that people need to be tapping. So we're on behalf of NCBA, we're certainly happy that you're here to offer that to our members and obviously the folks that you're already working with. We do have a few questions. The first one. Unfortunately, the person has apparently left. Hopefully, they'll rejoin or at least be able to get the answer on the recorded version. Their question was, for LLCs, how do you relate stockholder equity versus member equity?
It's basically the same. The value that you have in the company is stockholders equity or member equity. So it's the same number. The accountants just have to do the financial statements a little different, but it's the same number.
Great. Um, and Gary, I had a question for you, and maybe some of the other folks that are on the line might be able to speak to it or be inspired by it. But with the various groups that you work with, and the various kind of small business owners and businesses that are just out there, is the process pretty similar regardless of which industry? I know you mentioned that there were some there were some nuances in terms of how you measure equity and a few things like that. But in your experience, can anybody buy into this process and find success if they just take the right steps?
When you say buy into this,
So like succession planning and preparing for, to sell, will they find success if they take the right steps? Or I mean, I know, success isn't always a guarantee, but, there, I feel like that might be a concern as a business owner. If I do all these steps, am I guaranteed a good result, or, can you speak to
well,
that?
that's a great question. If I do all these steps, and if I do everything that we talked about the last hour or so, will I be guaranteed success? And the answer is no. It depends on what industry you're in and where you're located. If you have a hardware store in downtown Boston, it's a lot easier to find a buyer that's willing to pay a good price than if you're located in Du Bois, Wyoming. It depends on where you're at. If you go through the steps that I covered, you will make the company more valuable, which will make it more attractive. And even in Wyoming and Montana and New Mexico and Utah, we're buying and selling. We're helping members all the time sell their companies. So it can be done, and it's a whole lot easier if you have an excellent company with great profits. If you have a company that's breaking even every year, it's harder to sell it. I see people all the time where they lose money every year, and that's hard to sell. So they need to go through these steps, improve the margins, reduce expenses, make it look better, clean up the financial statements, and they'll have a much better chance of selling the company. But it depends on where they're located. And in the member co-ops, how many other members are close by? When I say close by, I mean within 20 to 50 miles. So they need to do all the things we talked about, and it doesn't matter whether they're located in downtown Chicago, or Kalamazoo, Michigan. The company will be more valuable, and it will be easier to sell, but it does depend a little bit upon your geography and where you're located. But yeah, all these things make the company more attractive, and it's a good idea to do it. There's no reason not to do all the stuff we talked about.
Right. Okay. We've got two questions related to S Corps. The first is, how does having an S Corp differ from a C Corp in the selling process?
That is a really big question, and there's 1.6 million people on my first slide up there that haven't got it figured out yet. Let's say that I have a company, I have a C Corp, and I'm going to sell it for $1 million. The C Corp will wind up paying 2 taxes, or you will pay 2 taxes. Here's what happens is that the buyer pays my C Corp $1 million, and they get all the assets and inventory and employees and everything. So inside the C Corp, I've got $1 million, and the C Corp pays tax on that, at about 30%. So I got $700,000 left after I pay taxes. And then the C Corp is going to pay me that money because it's my cash. I sold the company. So I take it out, and I'm going to pay ordinary income on that, which is going to be at least 35 to 39%. So on the $700,000, I'm going to pay another 35%. So I got $500,000 left. So I sold my business for $1 million. I paid 2 taxes, and I got about $500,000 left. And if you're in California, it's going to be more like $400,000 because of high taxes. Now, if I have an S Corp, and I sell my company for $1 million, the $1 million flows through the S Corp, just like it does the LLC. So the $1 million goes into the S Corp, and it comes immediately right out onto my personal tax return. So let's say I pay 35%. So out of the $1 million, I've got $650,000 to $700,000 after tax. So with the S Corp and the LLC, you'll always pay less tax. With the C Corp, you pay corporate tax and personal tax, which means you always pay more tax. So when you get ready to retire, you don't want to be in a C Corp. You know, there are some things that we can do to minimize the taxes. You know, I can save probably 50 or 75,000 or 100,000 maybe, but I can't eliminate the second tax completely. So that's the difference. When you're selling your company, the C Corp is going to pay more tax.
Gotcha. Great. And the second S Corp related question, the asker says, my son has 30% of the S Corp. Is paying off the shareholders loan important when he purchases the balance of shares in the next 5 years?
No. If you're selling within the family, we can be a little bit looser on these rules because the son or daughter always should know what's going on in the company. And if there's a company loan there, if my son was going to be buying me out, one of the things that I would negotiate is for him to pay off my loan over time, because I've already paid tax on that, so I can get that money back tax-free. But I would continue to have the corporation make those payments and pay off that loan over time, but I wouldn't eliminate it. I would just let the company go ahead and pay off at the normal monthly payment rate. When you're dealing with the family, I'm not worried about what's on the financial statement, because the son's not going to ask, or the daughter's not going to ask a lot of pointed questions.
Got it.
So leave it alone. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So another question is coming in. What information, it's kind of two questions in one. What information would we need to provide to get started on something like this? And, you know, I guess when would we contact a company like Castle Wealth, you know, in this process? What's sort of the timeline, and what are the to-dos to get started?
I would say it would be nice to have a brief chat at least a couple years ahead of time. But if you're ready to start the process right away, maybe you've been approached by somebody in your industry that wants to buy your business, then we should start talking at least 6 to 9 months ahead of time, because it'll take a month or two to work on all the valuation and the methods for selling and trying to figure out what's the best options for the seller. And then it'll take a month or two to negotiate with the buyer. We're going to bounce back and forth. I call it the dating process. You know, and they make an offer, we make a counter offer, back and forth, and then the lawyers will draft the legal documents, the term sheets that I talked about, or the letter of intent. So that'll take another month or so. So as you can see, it takes anywhere from 6 to 9 months to finish the whole thing. That's the normal process. Now, it could be done in a month or two, but we're moving so fast, we may miss something. So I would rather take 4 to 6 months to get this done. You know, so if somebody wanted to start the process, get with your advisors 6 to 8 months or 9 months ahead of time. And whoever you're working with, they're going to want to see the last couple years tax returns, the last couple years financial statements. Maybe they need to see the lease document for your lease in the real estate. There may be a stock redemption agreement that needs to be read. Any other terms that affect the property. I'm working on one right now in California where the bank covenants for assets and cash flow, we've got to make sure that as we design this process, we're not screwing up the covenants with the bank. So there's always a lot of things that we have to look at. So I would say at least 6 to 9 months ahead of time to get started.
Great. Okay, we had another one come in. What if you can't pay off the loan in advance? How is that accounted for in the sale terms if it stays in the business as debt?
Another good question. If I'm selling to my son or daughter, like I said 3 or 4 minutes ago, I would just leave it on the books. But if I'm selling to somebody else in the industry and my family's not buying it, then let's say I loan the company $100,000, and then I'm going to sell the company to somebody in my co-op industry. So when they buy my company, let's say they pay $1 million for it. I'm just picking round numbers. If they pay $1 million for my company, then when that money comes in, the first $100,000 that comes into the company would pay off that loan. So I get that $100,000 back. Okay, and then we have to pay tax on that would be part of my basis. So we'd have to calculate the taxes on the $1 million, but I don't have to pay tax on that $100,000 because I'm paying myself back. I already paid tax on it once. So that's how it's accounted for, is that when the money comes into the company from selling it, the first thing you do is to pay off your loans back to yourself.
Great. It looks like that might be the last question. I know we're about to run up against the time here. I do want to ask if anybody has any other questions. Definitely send those through right now, and we'll see if we can't get Gary to answer one or two more. Gary, I guess what are, do you have some, maybe like an example that comes to mind just while we're waiting for a question? Do you have an example that comes to mind about, somebody that, I guess we're looking to sell, and, they did everything right, and it was just, they were able to follow all the steps and have some success, and, what did that do for them and their family? Can you talk a little bit about that, and how, because I feel like, you're talking about family business and everything like that, there's got to be something to be said for effectively selling and transitioning your business within the family, or even if it's outside of it, but there's got to be something that is it feels good about that for both the seller and the family involved in that.
Yeah, that's another good question, Brian. One of the good parts about this business is that I get to meet a lot of great people, and a lot of the owners that I meet with, some are in big cities and a lot of them are in small cities, but a lot of them tell me that, Gary, we've got to make this work because my town depends on my store being open. I have to provide employment for the 10 people that work for me. I support the schools. We support the churches. We support the baseball team. We support everybody in the community. I've got to keep this store open. I can't let it go broke. We've got to do this so that whoever buys this location will continue to support the community. So a lot of business owners I work with, they're very concerned about their employees. They're concerned about their communities, all the people that they've known over the years, and they don't want the company closing their doors. They want them to stay in business. And protecting the company, protecting the employees, and protecting the community is one thing that a lot of these family businesses are, well, most of them are very concerned about. And it's fun to help them accomplish that goal so that the company has a successful transition. The next owner, whether it be the children or not, continues the business. The employees continue to work there. They continue to support the local churches and the baseball clubs and the local 4-H and whatever they're working on. So there's a lot more involved than just the owner and the buyer. it's a lot more than just two people. You
Right.
know, it's everybody that works there in the community.
Yep. Well, we do have one last question, and thank you for that, Gary. I think that helps kind of put all this in perspective and why it's important. The last question is, what are the fees in selling a company with Castle Wealth? Is that something you can easily quote now, or is that something that you'd want to follow up?
Well, it all boils down to hours. It's about 250 to 295 an hour. You know, so if we work 10 hours, we just bill for 10 hours. If we work 20 hours, or you know, over the next 9 months or the next 12 months, you know, we could work 10, 20 hours, 30 hours, but it's all based on hourly. You know, and your lawyers are based on hourly, your accountants are based on hourly. So normally I would not suggest to hire a business broker, but some of you might do that, but that's not my first choice. Work with your co-ops, work with your advisors on finding a buyer. Even the sellers, they know who all their competitors are, so the sellers already have a list of 3 or 4 people that might want to buy the company. So it boils down to hours. So, you know, in some cases it might be $3,000 or $4,000 over 9 months, or it could be $5,000 or $6,000 over 9 months. It depends on how big the company is and how much work is involved.
Right on. All right. Well, I'm going to close down the questions for now, and we can wrap up the webinar officially. And Gary, thank you again for participating and offering this information to everybody. I want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, and you will receive a link to be able to view that recording. And again, we encourage you to share it with staff, family, you know, peers, whomever would find this conversation of interest. You know, Gary mentioned a few times about cooperatives. I know several of the attendees on this call are part of purchasing cooperatives. So if you're looking for more information about what NCBA CLUSA does with purchasing co-ops, please feel free to visit our website, ncba.coop. And if you're able, you know, come down to Miami next month for our National Purchasing Co-op Conference, September 19th through the 21st. It's going to be a great event, and you can always reach out to me at NCBA to ask any questions, or to, you know, if you have any questions about the schedule or agenda. My email is B as in Brian, and my last name Munson, M-U-N-S-O-N, at ncba.coop, bmunson@ncba.coop. And again, you know, Gary, it's been my pleasure moderating today's webinar. Thank you to everybody that attended. Anything to leave the audience with, Gary? Otherwise, we'll close this down.
I'm tickled that a lot of old friends listened in. Hopefully a lot of new friends listened in, and I hope that some of the information was helpful. So I appreciate all your time, and I look forward to seeing you sometime at a convention soon. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gary. I'll circle back with you shortly. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Bye, all.